Happy almost June, my very patient brothers and sisters. If you're thinking that it's been a longer delay than normal in passing on a video update to you, you are correct. For some reason, I don't know if it was the length of the trip being 22 days, the time zone change, the food that impacted my tummy, or any other factor, but it has definitely taken me longer to get back in touch. And I appreciate your patience. And actually, this morning was the first morning that I felt a bit more clear-minded and able to hopefully articulate the many ways that I saw God work. And once again, as in the past, I'm left with what's almost an impossible challenge of expressing the many ways I saw God respond to your prayers. I just wish you could have been there with me. I wish you could have seen what happened during conversations, during sessions, during the different retreats I was leading, during counseling conversations. I just wish you could have been there when I saw these things happen. And there's no way I can give it justice. And that's why I want to continue to invite you to get in touch with me by phone, email, whatever, just to ask about specific ways you were praying and how I saw God respond to those. I will give you a general gist using the prayer guide that I know many of you used and that really enabled you to pray in timely and appropriate ways. And that was amazing. In its own right, even to get texts from a few of you saying, here's how I'm praying for you today. And it was right along the lines with what the prayer guide was anticipating and with what I was experiencing. So thank you. So I'm going to begin with what I said on this prayer guide were ways you could pray for the entire trip. And one of the ways was for rest, sleep, spiritual stamina, physical strength, and all those things. And I want to tell you that God really put his hand on me while I was there and those who were serving beside me and prevented any distraction coming from an illness or exhaustion or anything like that. And even when I did not get a good night's sleep, even when I did contract a tummy issue and needed to get antibiotics, for less than $5 a dose, by the way. Even when that happened, it wasn't a distraction and it didn't take the schedule and the itinerary and my ministry opportunities off the rail. So thank you for praying that way. God really, really responded because there were a lot of opportunities to not sleep very well in a loud culture or not eat foods that I'm accustomed to. So I really appreciate you pray in that way. As you recall, there were 3 basic phases to the trip, roughly 1/3 of the trip each. The first week, 6 or 7 days, was in Kenya, and one of the couples on the spiritual refreshment retreat gave me this mug as a thank you for being with them, which it was my privilege to be there anyway. But while in Kenya, I had this spiritual refreshment retreat, as the prayer guide described, with a small group of couples. And our times together were rich. The feedback they gave me and others that they spoke to later after the retreat gave me was that it was significant for them. It was more than worthwhile. It was extra refreshing spiritually. So thank you for praying beside me, beside them. And even though in Kenya it was red hot, that's the way I experienced it, I was able to get enough sleep and stay in the shade enough that the heat didn't become a drain or a distraction for my ministry there. So thank you for praying that way too. Then the next 2 weeks were in Ethiopia. In the second week or second phase, it was actually only 4 or 5 days, I was able to attend a conference made up of national leaders from Africa, several different nations represented, and from some American, British, German missionaries who are focusing on taking the gospel to the Somali people. And that, if you know anything about the background and the history of the Horn of Africa, that's a significant challenge. And so I was able to come alongside and serve as an unofficial chaplain, so to speak, at this conference, even though I wasn't presenting. I was having many sidebar conversations, and those have established a foundation that I'm going to build upon in the future by getting together with some of these leaders and missionaries by Skype or by email, by phone, if they come to the States. So that was very significant. And the transition was very pleasant from Kenya to Ethiopia, because I didn't realize this fully until I got there. But where I was in Ethiopia most of the time was the capital city, and it's at an altitude of about 8,100 feet. And because of that, even though the sun is very close to the equator, just like it was in Kenya, it just wasn't as hot and it wasn't as humid. So that was a very refreshing transition. Then I left one side of town in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the capital city, and went to the other side of town, which was pretty much the only time I wasn't with a ministry host of some kind. And that turned out to be an adventure in a taxi. I was never in danger or anything, but it was an adventure going from site A to site B and even locating site B. So as those of you may have prayed about my making connections and things like that, this was one way that God responded very clearly in helping me get from point A to point B there in Addis Ababa. So the third phase, which was the longest phase, it was about 9 days, a little bit more than 9 days, involved coming alongside a ministry that ministers to church pastors, either church planting pastors or pastors of existing churches, throughout Ethiopia. And these are different denominations, they're different backgrounds, different styles, but what this ministry does is they encourage the churches to become healthy. It's a quite inspiring model of ministry they have. And I was able to speak, facilitate, guide, interact with these pastors at 2 separate 2-day conferences in Ethiopia. And they were very profoundly impacting for those who came, including the worship, the fellowship with each other, and also the themes from John 13 through 16 that we were thinking about together. God just really used it in just a variety of ways. And you could sense God responding to your prayers. Not to mention when I described to them how people they had never met and might not meet or see until heaven were praying beside them, they just couldn't get over that. I'm not just talking tears to their eyes, but just repeated comments. Wow, there are people praying for us. Please tell them thank you for this. And so that was more than encouraging for them too. Some of you were praying that even though I was speaking to a larger group, instead of the group from 10 to 25 that I'm usually guiding through a spiritual refreshment retreat, some of you were praying specifically that when we broke down into groups, that they would be effective and encouraging for them. And they were both effective and encouraging according to the pastors who attended. So thank you for praying that way. There was one bit of travel to a more rural part of Ethiopia. That went smoothly, as smooth as the roads would allow that trip to be. And I was able to see some wildlife along the way. There's a kind of gorilla that's indigenous to that part of Ethiopia. And as we made the drive, we saw a herd of them, if that's what you call a herd of gorilla, on the side of the road. So that was fun to see that. But all in all, it was just a very rich time, all 3 phases. The third phase was more intense, more schedule loaded, but also I think even most worthwhile from my whole time there with the conversations I had and the follow-up I had. So thank you for participating with me. You really did go with me to Africa as you prayed beside me. I really appreciate that. And please, again, call and ask for more clarification. Thanks for your support, your love, but most of all, your prayers. And our Father really responded.